Hey everyone, my name is Freck, and today we're going to be working on a Logic Pro X beginner walkthrough tutorial. So I'm going to assume it's your first time opening Logic, you're staring at a blank canvas, and we're going to take you to a mini project by the end of this video. On top of that, I created a starter sample pack which you can download below, so you can follow along and have some dope samples to put in your projects right away. So let's get into it. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is set up a new project. So click the project on the left here and then click Empty Project. We'll choose to set up a template in a future tutorial because it's a great way to set things up how you'd like and save time. But for right now, we're just going to go with an empty project and come down here and click choose. So as soon as we choose our empty project, the first thing you'll be asked to do is choose an instrument type. You'll see them all listed here, but the main two are software instrument and audio instrument. Now, software instruments will be sounds you can trigger from a MIDI keyboard, your computer keyboard, or drawn by hand. These sounds will either be Logic's own built-in synths or purchase synths like Serum, Silent, Omnisphere, things like that. An audio track is used when you're looking to set up a microphone or connect an external instrument, such as an acoustic or electric guitar from your interface. Or, how I personally like to use it most, by dragging in audio files into the project, like reference tracks and sample packs. When you drag an audio file into Logic, it'll automatically create an audio track for your audio to sit in. So no worries if you find your favorite drum loop and you want to pull it in and start using it right away. So first, I'll set up a software instrument. I'll leave the settings as is and click Create. Now you can see our software instrument has landed right here. It currently doesn't have a synth loaded, but we'll do that in a moment. If you look above this, you'll see these two icons, the Add Track button and the Duplicate Track button. By clicking this plus button, you'll be able to add another instrument or an audio track. The button beside it is Duplicate Track. When you click this button, it will duplicate the track you have selected. That means it'll copy everything that you've done to that instrument. So it'll copy the instrument type, EQs, sends, automation, all of it. We'll dive into this a little later, but for right now, let's click that plus icon and bring in an audio track. So click Audio Track, leave the settings as is, and click Create. Now you can tell which track is a MIDI track or an audio track by these little icons right here. The audio tracks will show a WAV file, where the synths will show a musical note. So you may notice each of these tracks has a mute, a solo, and a record button. To mute a track, simply press the M or M on the keyboard. Solo will highlight this button here, so you could solo an individual track or an entire group. Maybe you wanted to solo your basses and leads, you could do that. And your record, you simply press R, which would engage this button up here. Now you can also record across multiple synths. So if you want to just play MIDI across one big layer, you could easily do that, which is really nice. All right, before we go any further, now that we have the two basic track types set up, the second step is to make a few adjustments to some of the preferences in Logic. Now, these preferences aren't set up by default, so we're going to have to adjust them, and we're going to do that by coming up here, clicking Logic Pro X, Preferences, and Advanced Tools. Now, once we're in our Advanced Tools tab, we're going to want to click Show Advanced Tools, and then Enable All. This makes sure you get all the advanced tools and the most out of Logic. Once all these settings are enabled, we're going to want to make sure our audio interface is set up properly. So we're going to click this audio tab and check our output and input device. Now, the output device is where your speakers are going to be plugged into. So mine's plugged into my M-Track Plus. My input device is my microphone. So I also have that set up to my audio interface. But if you had a different mic set up, you'd probably choose a different input, whichever it may be. Now, these are the settings I run below that I've checked with multiple producers, and they all seem to run the same settings. So 128 buffer size, processing threads automatic, buffer range medium, multi-threading playback and live tracks, summing stack high precision, and rewire behavior off. Once all these are set, click apply, it should close out, and that's step 2. All right, now that we have the inner workings all set up, let's get ourselves familiarized with the icons, layout, and tools. This column on the left is the library, which is Logic's built-in presets and sounds, and it's open or closed by this button above. Depending on if you have an audio track or software track selected, you'll see different settings. When a software track is selected, you'll see a library for different sounds. And here you can choose to load up a bass, guitars, pianos, arpeggiators, things like that. By choosing one of these, we can start playing with notes on our keyboard right away. When an audio track is selected, the library list will change to audio presets. If you choose one of these, Logic will auto-populate settings and effects that it thinks will sound best for each listed source, like a dance vocal, a natural vocal, things like that. Now, between you and I don't use this library window very much after all my years of production, but it's a great starting place for beginners. But in time, you'll be using your own effect chains, external synths, and things like that. Now, the next icon, and the most important in my point of view, is this little eye. This is Logic's inspector window, and I keep it up at all times. This brings up a channel strip where I'll be able to see what instrument we're using, turn the volume up and down, pan left or right, see our output like stereo output or if it's being sent to a group, sends to like reverbs and delays, and audio effects for things like compression, distortion, EQ, all that. The track on the right here is a stereo out. Now, this usually stays up at all times unless you select one of these sends. So it might show you a send channel of a reverb or delay, but we won't be messing with that right now. For now, we'll just focus on it being the stereo out. The stereo out, or the master channel, is where all of these tracks will converge. This is usually where people do their mastering moves, like EQ and limiting, things like that. Now, this light gray column here is where you'll see all of your tracks, like the software track and the audio track we created earlier. This list can get long pretty quick. I've had songs with over 150 channels. Now let's say you have multiple synths. Pretend these are all basses or all guitars. A simple trick to keep things organized is to click, hold shift, and click the top of the instruments you want to select. When they're all highlighted light gray, right click and click create track stack. Now this gives you two options, a folder stack and a summing stack. A folder stack will just package everything neatly, where a summing stack will do the same, but it will allow you to make processing moves to everything in this folder. So if I wanted to put one EQ on all three sounds, I could do that very easily. So I always use summing, I never use folder. So let's click summing, click create, and you'll see now everything was kind of put into this nice little package. So if I click the arrow, it'll minimize, open it up so you can see what's inside. I can double click and rename bass. If you wanted to rename your instruments, you could say sub, mid bass, and top bass. So now that we have all of our basses in this bass folder, let's just say we wanted to enhance the bass of all of these things in the folder. We could very easily do that without having to go through each sound and do that move. So this is a very convenient way to keep things organized as well as make life easy for you when you want to make broad strokes across all sounds. So I'm just going to close this out. If you want to close down an EQ or any of your effects, simply click here on the right and click no plugin. Now that we've learned a little bit about our track menu and how to group everything, we're going to minimize this group here, and then we're going to come check the next button on the list, which is the quick help button. When engaged, this is a solid tool for telling you about each area or button you hover over. If you're stuck on a certain thing, you can just kind of hover over it and the quick help will tell you a bit about it. Now, I personally don't use this, but if you're looking to learn a bit more about things that you might not know about, it's a great thing to keep up. The next button here is Logic's toolbar. I personally don't use this at all and wouldn't recommend anyone mess with it as a beginner. I just leave it off. Besides this is Logic Smart Controls. It's Logic's way of allowing you to quickly edit some parameters of a track like EQ without having to open individual plugins. I personally never really use this, so I just leave it off. Next is Logic's Mixer, which you can press by hitting X. This is where all of your MIDI tracks, your audio tracks, and everything you do will exist with the respective channel strip settings. This will also show you all of your buses, group stacks, your master channel. Anything you do or create will be located down here. This section, though very important, I leave down until I really need it. I don't start looking in here until I need to look across the broad spectrum of the track, but just knowing where it is very helpful. And finally, this button is Logic's MIDI editor, which you can bring up by pressing E on the keyboard. This is where you'll see your piano roll MIDI editor, which is super important for building your song. Also, if you have an audio file selected, you can come down here and edit the parameters very quickly. This is a super helpful tool and one you'll be using most of the time. Up next, we have this large gray area. That's our timeline. This is where we'll play through and assemble our tracks by beats, bars, minutes, and seconds. You can see your bar currently indicated on this dark blue display, depending on where your playhead is. Your playhead is this vertical line that you can drag around and it shows us where we are in our project. You can change these settings of the display by this arrow right here. This will allow you to show whatever preferences you prefer, but I personally like custom. When opened up in custom, the first section of the display shows our playhead location in minutes and seconds, where under that shows beats and bars. The next part of our display shows our cycle bar information. So when a cycle is enabled, it shows us that the cycle starts at bar 1, ends at bar 5, and cycle can be enabled by either clicking this little highlighted box, pressing C, or clicking this icon up here. This cycle will constantly repeat. When you hit play, it'll just loop over and over again. You can move this around by simply dragging, you can extend it or shrink it by pulling on the ends, And it's a great tool when you're looking to loop a drop section, a breakdown, or you want to stick to a certain part of a song to focus on. This next bit is our track tempo, and we can easily drag that up or down depending on where we want our song to sit, or double click and just type it in yourself. Besides that is our time signature and our MIDI activity meter. So I'll press some notes on my MIDI keyboard and you can see it pressing the notes here, and the velocity, so how hard I'm hitting the key, is indicated by that number there. The lower it is, the softer I'm pressing the key, and the higher, the harder I'm pressing the keys. Finally is our CPU meter, and this is just to show us how hot our computer's running if we have a lot of stuff going on in the project. Now to the far left of this we have our playthrough buttons, which is rewind, forward, stop or go to the beginning, play, record, and engage our cycle. So as we saw earlier, pressing C engages our cycle, pressing R will record, pressing return will stop, pressing the spacebar will play, and using the comma and period keys will either move us forward or move us backward. All right, so something to mention, we have two buttons for recording up here. One is our bar count-in and the other is our metronome. So by pressing K, we can disengage or engage the metronome, which will click every beat while recording, and our bar count-in. So we'll turn the count-in off and we'll leave the metronome on, and we'll hear what we hear when we're recording. So pressing K. That will keep you in time if you're recording, say, live guitar, or if you're singing, you don't have a backbeat. And the one bar count-in I find really helpful. I use it all the time. It'll give us this little section of a run-up before we actually get into our section of recording. So we'll check that out right now. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then recording would begin. So two helpful little buttons I keep engaged all the time, and I'd highly recommend you do the same. All right, so beside our metronome, we have the master volume slider. I never touch this. I've made a mistake in the past where I have, and then I thought my track was good, and I had this at like -5. Kind of ruined some things for me messing with that, so I always just leave that at 0. Right beside that, we have our list editor button, which I don't really mess with, and we have our notepad button. So if you want to leave notes, you could do that, but I don't really mess with that either. So before we begin diving in with our loops, I'm just going to reset the project. So I'm going to grab our cycle, grab it to the start of the project. I'm also going to delete the space group, and we're going to create a new software instrument. Just grab a piano. So software instrument, we'll come over here to our library, and we'll come down and find our pianos. And we're just going to grab a Steinway Grand. So as you can see earlier, it auto-populated settings, and we'll fool around with those a little bit. All right, now let's duplicate this channel, and we're going to turn this into a bass. So let's just grab the Liverpool bass. All right, now that we have these set up, I'm going to show you how the basic Apple loops work. So by pressing O or clicking this icon here, again, that'll open up the Apple loops, and the Apple loops are organized across the top by name, beats, favorites, tempo, and key. To preview a loop, just simply click on it. Click again to turn it off. Now, if you were to drag one of these samples in that wasn't at your project's current tempo, example us being 120 and say this one down here being 110, you might get this notification. So essentially it's asking you, do you want to change this entire project to the 110 BPM? But I say no, I want this to stretch to our current project tempo. We're not going to use this sample, but be wary of that notification when it does pop up. So to make things easy and save some time, I went through and selected a few favorites that we can just quickly drag and pull in for time's sake. We'll grab a synth and an audio file. The musical notes here indicate that this is going to be a synth with MIDI information, and this audio symbol is just meaning an audio file. So as we drag in this synth, we'll see it's a synth with some plugins already established, and by double clicking or pressing E, we'll see that it has some MIDI note information. And we'll go and grab a little beat here and we'll pull it onto our audio file. We can also drag the audio file anywhere in the project and it will automatically create its own audio track, as you can see here. Now once we have our synth and our audio file in here, there are a few things we can do. First, we'll come up here and close our Apple loop so we can see a bit more of what's going on. And then we'll come up here to the top right to these two sliders. Pulling on these will extend the project view vertically and horizontally. So we could really pull these out and kind of come and see what's going on and check out audio file transients or get surgical with our cuts on audio loops. It's a really great feature, but we're just going to back this off for the time being. From here, we can start to play with some of the tools. You'll see these two buttons located right here, which will operate our tool selection. Now, these two buttons operate the same tools. The only difference is one is a permanent tool that we have up at all times, like our current pointer, where the other tool is something that we will press and hold command to engage. So as you can see, I just changed to the scissor tool, and by holding command, it's now allowing me to use the scissor tool. I always leave my main tool as the pointer, and my second will usually be the scissor tool or the fade tool. As you see, when I have the scissor tool, holding command and hovering it will allow me to cut the audio how I'd like. To undo this, I hold command and press Z. I use this so often. Continuously pressing Z while command is held will continue to undo anything you've done in this project window. So moving the audio around, say making some cuts. Let's say if we wanted to pull a fade in, the undo feature is really helpful. Another tool I like is the fade tool. When I select fade, I can now hold command and come to the end of an audio file and drag across a fade, which is really nice. So let's check it out. We can also do the same from the other side and make the audio fade in. Holding command and dragging up or down will change the slope of the fade. And to reset it completely, we can either command Z or just grab the end of the fade and pull it all the way back. Another feature I always use is the loop feature. As you can see, our synth isn't as long as our audio file. So we'll fix that now by simply hovering our mouse over the top right part of this region and dragging it out. We can also keep these going as long as we'd like as well. Now you can tell where a loop begins, indicated by the faded out region compared to its original. So right here it's much brighter, and then this faded out section, that's our loop. And likewise down here, we see our MIDI notes are all kind of bright and they fade. That means we're looped out. Alright, so now that we understand a little bit about Apple loops, let's mess around with creating an original piano line using our own MIDI information. So up here on our grand piano, if we didn't have an external MIDI keyboard plugged in, we could draw in some piano notes by hand. Simply right-click and create MIDI region. This will create an empty box where we can start to draw in MIDI notes. You can either double-click this to open it up or press E to see our piano roll. When our piano roll is opened, we can click the piano notes to hear how they sound. And when we like a note, we can right-click and create note. When a note is created, we can move its position by dragging it up or dragging it down. We can also extend it the same way we extended loops. Simply hover your mouse over the end of the note and drag. When you have a note created, you can simply duplicate this to save yourself some time. Just click and hold the note, and then hold Option until the green circle appears, indicating copies and engaged. Now, while still clicking Hold and Option, drag your mouse to a new note location, and let go of your mouse before letting go of Option. Now, if we drew in some notes and they were off time, maybe something like that, we could easily fix this with Logic's quantize feature. Simply grab all the notes and either press Q or click this Q right here, and that'll quantize all of these notes to the closest 16th note. So as you can see, this entire one bar section is made up of 16 individual sections. You can change it to, if you want it to be cut into quarters. So all of these would be drawn to the nearest quarter. But I think 16th note is most accurate, when you're playing piano notes and moving with quick MIDI information. I think it's the best. Now to delete all these notes, simply grab and drag, or just Command A to select all, and backspace or return to delete. We can do the same to our little note grid here. All right, so up next, we're gonna make some piano chords to fit this little synth melody here. Now when I dragged this in earlier, it told me it was in the key of C. So if you know musical scales, we're gonna have to use the C scale to make chords to fit these. To keep things easy, I've pre-made and packaged some MIDI chords in the sample pack for you. We'll go get those and some other samples now. So beside our Apple Loops button is the browser window. This will let us search our computer locations for sample packs we may have saved. For example, the YouTube sample pack I made that you can download below. As you can see, I already have it open to my desktop here. So I searched my computer, my desktop, and I had the sample pack on my desktop. So when I open that, you'll be greeted with this little screen here. So I have some kicks, claps, hats, and some extras organized for you, as well as MIDI. Let's click the MIDI folder. So right here, you'll see some MIDI chords that I previously created and exported. To use these, simply click and drag them over to our grand piano. So let's solo these and hear how they sound by hitting S and then pressing play. You can tell when solo is engaged by this yellow box that it's put in. To unsolo, simply press S, and we'll check what this sounds like all together. Pretty nice. Let's turn down the volume of this though a little bit. Sounded pretty good. Let's loop it out. And we're going to change the length of our cycle. All right, so another tip, you may notice some of these piano notes are different colors. Those are note velocities, so how hard or soft we were playing the keys. As I make electronic music, I like all these to be pretty consistent, so let's make them all the same. Simply hold Command and press A to select all, and then click this automation button right here. You'll notice a new bar pop up with these long bands, and it tells us the note velocities that we're seeing. You can see that note velocity is selected down here. There's a lot of other things we can change, like pitch bends and things like that, but we're just going to stick with note velocity for the time being. Now, let's hear what it sounds like when we pull all these note velocities way down. You can hear how soft everything's getting, and when we crank it all the way up to the top, we're really slamming on the keys there. So I'm going to pull these all down to where I like, which is usually about anywhere from 100 to 110. You can also see the slider changing here. A little trick, usually you have to pull all the notes to the top to make them even, so then when you start dragging down, they're all at the same level. Otherwise, if we didn't do that, they'd all be just kind of dragging apart like that. So by dragging them all the way to the top, we'll flatten them out, and then we'll drag them back down to where we like. Right now, we could close this automation tab and use this little slider to control the whole lot of them. All right, now that we learned a little bit about piano roll, let's drag in some samples from the sample pack to finish off this tutorial. So I'm just going to click our browser. I'm going to go back to the sample pack, and let's just grab some claps right now. So as you can see, I have the tempo located here, and I have these samples at 126 BPM. So what's probably going to happen is I'm going to drag one of these in, and it's not going to stretch. As you can see, it's not hitting the end of the bar. And this is where I'm going to introduce you to flex pitch. That's that great tool I mentioned where Logic can pretty much stretch any sample to sound great. So how we're going to engage flex pitch is by coming up, and we'll click this button here. And then we'll come down here and we'll engage flex pitch. Now, as you can see, it's already sliced the sample to the correct BPM. So now, while flex pitch is engaged, I can't loop this out. It will stretch the sample. So I'm just going to grab Alt. I'm going to do the same copy technique that we did for the piano notes. So holding Alt, click and drag. All right, let's do it with another clap and fatten this up. So we'll pull this clap in. Since flex pitch is already engaged, we'll just turn it on onto the sample, and boom, automatically stretched out. And then we'll just copy it over, and we'll just turn the sample down a bit. Not too bad. All right, now last thing we're going to do is add a bass to the project. So a simple way to do that is to copy our chords down. Since we already have our bass selected, we'll make sure that the Liverpool bass is engaged, and we're going to delete all the top chords. Let's hear if this is low enough. We could probably go a little lower. So I'm just going to drag these down an octave. Let's hear this out. Not too bad. If we were just to play these together, you could even do some cool moves like going up and down octaves. Or if we didn't want to loop this out, we could just drag it over and combine these two layers. So merge per track and have some variation. Sounded pretty nice. All right, a few final things to mention is basic things like coloring. So right now I'll just like grab our percussions. I'll hold Alt and press C, and it will bring up this color panel. So we'll just color a few things. I'll grab my synths. I'll turn them yellow. Let's grab that percussion. I'm gonna put that orange. I'm going to hold Shift and drag the whole lot up. I'm going to grab the Steinway. Let's make that yellow, maybe. Let's give it a little green. And then we'll give our bass always like a blue for the basses. All right, so we got a nice, colorful, organized session going on here. We could actually grab all of these percussions like we did earlier by clicking, holding shift, clicking again, right click, and create a track stack. And we could name this our percussion group. Now you'll see when you close, it automatically has this little bar. Usually what I'll do is just create an empty MIDI region to drag across. This is because if I wanted to do some automation, I'd press A and come in here. We didn't really cover automation, but it just keeps everything organized, as you can see. And we could actually color that as well. So we'll close our color tab and we'll look what we have so far. Looking good. Now we'll check what we're hitting on our master out. Pretty loud. So what we're going to do is press X. We'll grab our groups here. So as we grab them down here, they're all highlighted. We can drag this up and down. We'll just bring this down to about -6. Now, we do -6 because that's where most mastering engineers like to receive the track at. When the track is going out, it will be hitting at about 0 or -1 or -2. But for right now, when we're starting our project and we're mixing, I try and keep everything anywhere from -6 on the stereo out to -10. And never change the volume of your stereo out. Always change your group volumes. So just like we did there, we grabbed them in the mixer. Be sure not to grab your reverbs and things like that. Just be wary of that. Only grab your groups and just drag them down. So we're sitting pretty nice. I think that's a good place to be. All right, there we have it. I hope this video helped you get up and running to make some dope music right away. If you have any more questions or suggestions, just leave them below. Like and subscribe for future content like this. And I've also just launched my website. So if you're someone who needs some more one-on-one training, be sure to check that out. But in the meantime, peace out.